Hello again, friends and fellow truth seekers. Mike Nicholas here with another episode of the Soul Unleashed podcast, where my goal is to help you break out of old paradigms, ask the right questions in your search for a deeper meaning for your life, and help you shift from a spiritual skeptic to a free thinker. Let's dive in with today's adventure. All right, welcome, and today we're going to talk about how to find your spiritual guide. We'll talk about what your spiritual guide is, how different faiths interpret the concept of a spiritual guide, the criticisms that exist out there about what spiritual guides are, especially from different religions. And then I want to talk about some experiences that I have, personal experiences, in finding my own spiritual guide. So first of all, what is a spiritual guide? Well, there are four things that kind of define what a spiritual guide is. Number one is that it is a non-physical or supernatural being. So spiritual guides are typically seen as entities that exist beyond this physical plane here on earth. They may be thought of as spirits, deceased ancestors, angels, or even energies that have transcended human limitations and thus possess insight beyond ordinary human knowledge. The second thing is that they are personalized connections. So generally, a spiritual guide is connected to you for some reason, but that it offers personal guidance to you, and yet it has a bond with you. And this connection might be lifelong or just exist for a specific period or purpose, like navigating a particular challenge or growth phase. The third thing is that a spiritual guide has roles and functions. So a guide is normally seen as a helper, counselor, or teacher, offering support through intuition or signs, synchronicities, or inner guidance. And they're thought to help people understand themselves more deeply, make better decisions, and help you follow a path that is aligned with your highest potential. Some guides even have particular specialties such as healing, creativity, or protection. And they may appear during times when their guidance is most relevant or most needed. Generally, they're wise, enlightened, or compassionate beings who have insights that help the person grow emotionally or spiritually. Fourth thing is that guides use different kinds of communication, but they're usually specialized. So guides, they communicate in various ways. One of the most common ways is through meditation, but they also appear in dreams. Certain things happen, they call them synchronicities, but certain things happen that seem to just fall into place. Sometimes you get intuitive insights. Sometimes you see symbols. Even the words of other people. Other people may say things to you that you understand are coming from your guide. So that's kind of what spiritual guides are. They're generally understood as non-physical. They're believed to offer guidance, support, and wisdom. And this concept exists across various cultures and various religions. So how do these different cultures or religions perceive spiritual guides? There is quite a difference. I'm going to talk about Christianity and some other traditions. So Christianity, spiritual guides are normally seen as guardian angels or saints that appear and offer divine protection or intercession. There's all kinds of stories in the Catholic faith anyway about saints and appearing to people and offering intercession, or people praying to saints and getting miracles. That's how saints become saints in the Catholic Church, is there are certain miracles that are attributed to people asking for their intercession. So on the Christian side, guides are generally guardian angels or saints. In the Indigenous tradition, they're commonly seen as animal spirits or ancestral beings, and they embody qualities needed by the person, such as wisdom, courage, or resilience. And there's a lot of stories here in the United States about the indigenous people here, and especially in the west of the United States, and different things they went through. Sometimes it's a buffalo, sometimes it's an eagle, but they have different spiritual guides. And in the New Age and spiritual movements, they're thought of as higher beings, ascended masters, or even spirit teams that assist individuals with their unique life journey and purpose. And then the fourth thing is Eastern traditions. Now, in the Eastern tradition, these guides are less explicit in concept, but they come from enlightened ancestors or one's inner spiritual essence. So all religions in general have this guide concept, and they're seen as benevolent and invisible influence guiding a person towards growth, insight, and fulfillment in alignment with your inner wisdom and your purpose. One question I had that I did a little research on was, can your guide be a deceased loved one? And of course, Of course, it can. And so there's kind of like 5 differences about loved ones being a spiritual guide. First thing is that, most obvious, is that the loved one has a connection through family bonds. So a deceased relative who becomes a guide is often thought to have a unique, intimate connection with you, and because of your shared familial ties and experiences. And this personal bond can make them a reliable and comforting presence for you, offering guidance that feels familiar and aligned with your personal life history. And this may be ancestors that you knew. In some cases, I've read stories about people that have their grandmother comes to them as a guide, and they never really knew their grandmother, or their grandmother passed before they were born or as they were born. But that's one of the first characteristics of a family ancestor guide, is that they have a common bond with you. In many indigenous, African, and Eastern traditions, deceased ancestors are revered as spiritual protectors or guides for their living descendants. So they're believed to watch over family members, offer protection, advice, and support, and the ancestors are very important. There's a lot of practices that involve ancestor veneration, which involve honoring their deceased relatives to maintain this connection and to invite their guidance. Another difference, the third difference about having an ancestor as a spiritual guide, is that deceased relatives who are believed to act as guides may communicate through dreams, intuitive impressions, or subtle signs. I know some people, for example, that believe that their father sends them messages when he leaves 2 dimes in a certain place, or when they find 2 pennies together, or a certain kind of shell on the beach. Now, generally, that's not a message they're receiving from their spiritual guide, but it is usually a form of reassurance or comfort that they're looking for. Sometimes they hear their favorite song might play at a significant moment, and that's interpreted as a form of support or reassurance. So people often feel the presence of these family guides during difficult times, and they sense the warmth and comfort, maybe even a familiar scent associated with that relative. One time I was driving in my car, and I clearly smelled the aftershave that our son used to use, when he was dolled up or going out someplace. But he loved this particular, I forget the name of it, some kind of spray thing that he liked. But anyway, it was his. And out of the blue, I wasn't wearing anything. Out of the blue, I smelled it in the car. So sometimes that's a way a family guide will communicate with you. Another way is that many believe that deceased relatives who guide us do so to help us grow and learn, maybe perhaps learn the lessons they learned in life. And because they know us, they're able to offer insights about family challenges and encourage healing within family dynamics. And then the last thing is, unlike guides that are perhaps unrelated or otherworldly, a deceased relative acting as a guide usually has specific knowledge about your family and your background, your personal life. And so this can make their guidance feel more relatable and grounded in your reality. But one caution here is that it's also believed not every deceased relative acts as a guide. So, you can pray or ask for somebody to be a guide. Doesn't necessarily mean that person will take on that role. Only those who have a peaceful, benevolent presence are thought to take on the role, and others may continue their journey or growth on a spiritual level elsewhere. So, yes, your spiritual or your family members can be a guide, and a very wonderful guide. I'll tell you a story about that real quick before we end here. Now, let me talk to you about some of the criticisms of spirit guides, because, part of this podcast is I want to, I know you could be listening to a whole bunch of podcasts, right? But I want you to think about these kind of things, but I don't just blindly accept things. I don't blindly accept spirit guides. Obviously, the Soul Unleashed thing is about my change from when I thought all this stuff was nonsense and silly to where I now accept it. So, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would have thought this was craziness, but some of the criticism I'm about to share with you are things that I used to think. So there's basically, four areas of criticism that attack this concept of spiritual guides. The first camp of criticism comes from scientific skepticism. So scientists, for example, and skeptics argue that there is no empirical evidence to support anything about the existence of spirit guides. There's nothing that physical, there's no videos of them, there's no recordings of them, at least nothing that scientists will accept. There's no evidence for evidence-based scientists. And so they suggest that the experiences that we attribute to spirit guides are more likely some type of psychological phenomena, and that's products of the mind rather than spiritual entities. They also suggest things like cognitive bias, where we perceive that there's spiritual guides helping us because we expect that. The brain is wired to find meaning in coincidences and to find patterns, maybe where patterns aren't there. We've all heard this before. And that may be what's happening, at least according to these skeptics, when we think we're hearing something from spirit, or we happen to find two dimes and it's complete coincidence, but our mind puts that together as something, as a message for one of our loved ones. And so that's the first area that a lot of the skepticism comes from, is scientists who don't believe that, obviously don't believe in it, but think that it's a psychological thing. There's another camp, and that's the philosophical or rationalist critiques. And there are people that study this and think about this, and the first thing they suggest is Occam's razor. Occam's razor is the name for a principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. So they suggest that internal intuition, problem solving, or even unconscious processing are more likely explanations for what some people interpret as guidance from a spirit guide. They also argue that relying on an unseen guide to make decisions might undermine your personal responsibility or reduce your reliance on reason and evidence. If you can say that, not that I hear voices, but that, I received this guidance to do this specific thing or take this specific action from my spirit guide, that maybe, making life decisions based on the belief in a spirit guide is less reliable than using evidence-based methods or critical thinking. So then there's another camp, which is the third camp, which is religious and theological criticism. And this is what I most normally experience. These are people, especially religious people, that fight this idea or oppose this idea of spiritual guides because it conflicts with established religious beliefs. And many traditional doctrines reject the idea of spirit guides, particularly in forms that conflict with the role of God, angels, or saints. So, for example, some Christian theologians believe that seeking guidance from spirits or entities outside of God or outside of established religious intermediaries like angels and saints can be dangerous or mislead believers away from their faith. They sometimes view spirit guides as entities that could be harmful, deceptive, or even not aligned with divine will. So I encounter this all the time with Catholic friends. Catholics are more than, it's like almost an irony. Catholics are more willing to believe in this kind of thing, like spiritual guidance or spiritual guides, because they're already, praying to saints for intercession, or praying to praying to the Blessed Mother, but praying to the Blessed Mother, requesting her intercession. Catholics kind of do this more and grow up with this. I did, than say conservative Christians. Conservative Christians definitely reject this idea of spirit guides, and there's a belief among especially conservative Christianity that entities that claim to be spirit guides may actually be malicious or demonic, leading people astray, meaning leading people away from God, away from Jesus Christ. And they argue that supernatural experiences do not clearly stem from God. I'm not sure how you make that clear, but supernatural experiences that do not clearly stem from God or that are not religiously sanctioned should be treated with caution as they mislead or harm believers. I have to tell you that I've had a lot of experience with people that see visions, that hear things, not just mediums. I mean, I've been through all that, but I've been with people who are Catholic, like Catholic, and they are able to communicate with the Blessed Mother, or they're able to communicate with Padre Pio, Saint Padre Pio. I've been in a situation one time where a woman that has these gifts or whatever started talking about the Blessed Mother, and I could smell roses. There were no roses or flowers in the room, and I started smelling roses. Now, she said that was the Blessed Mother being there and being with us. So I think this whole line about trying to decide what is actually clearly from God and what is not clearly from God can get blurred if you will, on the Catholic side. But generally in conservative Christianity, they reject all this. And, if it's not clearly from God, then it could be possibly demonic. The fourth camp and the last camp of criticism that I'll cover is that which comes from New Age people themselves, which is kind of ironic, right? But some critics within the spiritual or New Age community, they argue that the idea of spirit guides has been overly commercialized, and that self-proclaimed, quote, spiritual mediums or, quote, spiritual healers sometimes exploit people by charging fees for guidance from spirit guides, and that's ethically questionable. This kind of reminds me of a commercial I saw recently. Some of you have seen it. I know a lot of you that listen to this podcast aren't in the United States, but we have an insurance company here in the United States called Progressive Insurance, and they insure home and auto and boats and whatever. Anyway, they have a commercial. They have a lady on the commercial. Her name is Flo, and Flo's very funny, and the commercials are usually very humorous. And they had this one commercial recently where Flo is standing on a beach looking out at this beautiful lake with this gentleman, and they're taking it all in and saying how gorgeous it is and how wonderful it is and how pristine it is. And then somebody behind them off camera says, "Excuse me, it's my turn." And the camera turns around, and behind Flo and this gentleman is like a long line of countless people waiting to do the same thing, step up on the beach. And so this woman steps up right behind them. They move out of the way. She has a smartphone on a selfie stick, and she points it to herself, and she starts saying, "Here I am on this beautiful spot that I found, and I'm here manifesting abundance and expressing gratitude." And it's making fun of those kind of concepts, which are New Age concepts, but the commercial makes fun of it, and it does so in a pretty humorous way. But that criticism from the New Age people is that a lot of these terms have been commercialized, including the concept of spirit guides. So let me just finish here with some personal experience that I have with this kind of thing. Years ago, I've been questioning, my path, what I'm supposed to be doing in this life, all these kind of things for a long time. And when I got into Freemasonry, Freemasonry has exposed me to people who think unlike I do and have different thoughts and different concepts, and has encouraged me to at least consider or entertain other thoughts. About 2012, I think, there was a gentleman that gave a presentation at something I was attending, and he talked about the concept of spirit guides and recommended a book. And the book is called Hiring the Heavens, a practical guide to developing working relationships with the spirits of creation. And this book is by Gene Slatter, Slatter. Anyway, this book was really interesting. I read the whole thing, and it talked about how you can put together teams of spiritual experts, that all these souls, billions of souls, are waiting to be, quote, hired by you to help you here on this earth. And so what I did was I read the book, thought that was pretty cool, and I set up this matrix. I think it was a 3x3, 9 squares matrix. And in each block, I put kind of something I want to help with. So I don't remember exactly what it was, but block 1, for example, was my faith. I want to help understanding better my faith. Number 2 was project management. I want to hire and have project managers work with me. Number 3 was Freemasonry. I wanted past grandmasters and experts in Freemasonry to be available to help me. Number 4 was motorcycles. I was about to go on a motorcycle trip, and I wanted experts in motorcycles and motorcycle maintenance to guide me in that. Another one was navigation, I think, and on, right? And it went through. I had one for our son. I wanted the best doctors that were in spirit to help our son and help us make the right decisions in terms of his care, etc. And I would have to say, in general, I found that very effective. Now, I guess critics might argue that all I was doing was fooling myself and giving myself confidence. But, for example, on the Masonic side of things, when I was about to go do something like give a speech or a talk or a class or something in Freemasonry, generally you want to be pretty effective and come across as somebody knows what the heck he's talking about and relatively intelligent. And so I would do my homework. I would prepare to give the class or the talk. And then I would, right before I was about to go do it, I would ask for help from these spirit guides on the masonry side, asking them to help me say the right things or help the right things come to mind, because I wasn't using notes. Help the right things come to mind as I was giving the presentation. And a lot of times I would use memory aids that I'd learned in other pursuits about how to remember specific things, memory pegs. And I would say in general that maybe it did just relax me or give me confidence. I don't know, but it worked. And so, to this day, I will still use talking to those spirit guides where I need help. So that's been my experience for a long time. I eventually, after our son passed and we went through that crisis, and that really flipped my life around, and I started going to mediums. I found a medium, her name's Celeste Wood, and Celeste had a guided meditation. And I would recommend this to you if you're interested in trying to seek out your spirit guide, is guided meditations, especially if you look up Celeste. I don't know what her website is offhand. I'll put it in the show notes. But Celeste Wood, Wood, she's an expert on meditations that take you to where you can meet whatever entity or spirit guide might be working with you. Now, it took me a number of times to do this, 4 or 5 times, but I started to see the same, I wouldn't say people, I started to see the same guides in the way that I was thinking about this. And so for me, I have 3 guides that I rely upon or talk to. And I also believe in my guardian angel, that I have an angel that's also part of my spiritual team, and my ancestors. But look for guided meditations. And Celeste isn't the only one out there. There's other ones. But they really do help. They last about 15 minutes and take you through that process. I found that very effective. I did want to just close here with one experience that I had just today, because this is pretty odd, but it kind of fits in with this whole spiritual topic. I was making an outline for this podcast, and I try to do that sometimes instead of just getting in front of the microphone here and blabbering, although I've done that too. But I was making an outline for this podcast and spending some time actually at a coffee shop writing all this stuff out or typing this stuff up. And I got a WhatsApp message from my niece, Amy, who lives in Paris, France. Now, Amy, she's American, but she married a Frenchman. She lives in Paris. She's a mom, and she's been there for a number of years. But Amy is gifted with some type of spiritual sense or mediumship sense, and sometimes she'll receive messages out of the blue. I hadn't talked to her in a long, long time. Out of the blue, she sends me this message. Uncle Mike, I was trying to talk to Grandmom today, my mother, and she had a message for you. And so the message, which Amy had written out as she was receiving it, was from my mother and from my father. And it talked about, right now what I'm going through is I'm moving. I think I've mentioned this in other podcasts, but I'm in the process of, my whole life is flipped around. My wife is in a medical facility, and I'm trying to move closer to where she is, because she's been there for a couple of years now, and I just want to be closer to her. And so we've sold our home. I'm almost done all that process and moving all the stuff out and home inspections, all that jazz. But it's been a very tumultuous time, and it's been difficult, when you lived in a home like we have for almost 22 years, to go through all the stuff that you find, all the pictures, all the photo albums, our children's stuff, our grandchildren's stuff. I found my parents' old photos, and photos I didn't even know that my mother, when she passed, had left them in a box, so there's photos I hadn't even seen before. And they're high school yearbooks for my mother and my father. And so it's been an emotional thing gone through that, plus, making decisions about what to throw out, right? I know many of you listening to this podcast have been through that experience, and it's a challenge. But anyway, the message from my mother was that she and my father were with me as I was going through that. And my father said that he was sitting next to me as I was going through one of these boxes. How Amy would know that, I have no clue. And just at that moment, when I'm going through a podcast outline on a spiritual guide topic, would this message come through, and my mother and father would both come through. She said something else about attachment. Don't be afraid to give up attachment to things like the house, which was very difficult, right? When you've been in a home for this long. She said, don't be afraid to give up the attachment. Just let it go. Just be. I still have to kind of ponder, think about that message a little bit. Just be. And she says sometimes it's hard to do this kind of thing, but it's part of being human, is what she said. My father, even just the way the message came across is how he would talk. He said, hey, just give it a couple of months, everything's going to be fine. He was a very pragmatic, direct person, and I loved him to death. But just the way that his message was different from my mother's was pretty cool. But anyway, that's an example of, for me, spiritual guides. And my son, Matt, who's passed, Matt has always been, I've always been able to talk to him. And I used to meditate to do that, right? So I talk about meditation if you want to get to your spirit guide to meditate, but eventually you understand that they're always with you. They're always available. You don't need to necessarily meditate, although that it makes it clearer for me. But I always talk to Matt or my mother now. And just today, after I got that message, I was just talking to her in my head, and I hear her talk back to me and use words that that she would use when she was talking to me. Same with my father. So am I making all that up? Is that, to go back to the criticism, is that all something inside of me that I'm just bringing up and it's all in my head? Maybe. But I don't think so. I think it's you're able to communicate and talk with your deceased loved ones and your spirit guides. So that is the podcast for this week. I really thank you for joining. Like I said, I know you can be listening to 20 other podcasts, and I appreciate you spending some time with me, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.